As a fan of the Resident Evil franchise since the Resident Evil 2 remake, I finally got to play Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. It is considered by many fans to be the best in the trilogy, and I always wondered why that was the case. Because my only connection to RE3 prior to today was the remake that came out in 2020, and that game was not good, man. But fortunately for me, Capcom just recently released Resident Evil 2 and 3 on modern consoles, and I was finally able to get my hands on it for the first time. Now I can finally explore the clock tower and see what I was missing out in the remake. But will my journey inside the clock tower change my mind on the game? Will Resident Evil 3's innovations to the previous two games make for an experience different enough to earn its own merit? In this review, we will answer all these questions, and I will give my honest thoughts on the game as a first-time player. Now, with all that being said, let's get right into it. Resident Evil 3 introduces brand new mechanics to master early on. If you look inside your inventory as you gain control of Jill, you will see two files inside. Each file contains crucial information that you will need to survive the streets of Raccoon City. For one, the game teaches you about the new crafting system. By combining gunpowder and your reloading tool, you can craft whichever ammunition you want. It's pretty complex, all things considered, so bear with me as I try to explain. So by combining gunpowder A with the reloading tool, it will grant you pistol ammo, and doing the same with the gunpowder B will get you shotgun shells instead. Now this is where things get complicated. If you combine gunpowder A and B, you will make one gunpowder C. This type of gunpowder is used to make different types of grenade rounds. And trust me, you're going to want to know how to make those on your first playthrough. I know I did, but instead I ate ass for the entire run. The game is seriously no joke, you guys. Hell, the only difficulty options is easy and hard. This game is so hardcore and I love it. Moving on. The second mechanic the game tries to teach you is the dodging mechanic. Now, I must emphasize that this dodge is incredibly janky, and even the best players can't perform it consistently. And dodging can often result to get hit anyways, since you don't have iframes. Being badly positioned can be fatal in certain instances, but it can prove to be an extremely good defense option against the new types of enemies you will encounter. To perform the dodge, you will need to aim and press the action button right before an enemy hits you. And when it works, it makes combat look badass. If the dodge sounds like a turnoff to you, remember that you can beat the game without having to dodge. It is just a nice option to have while being in combat. Another innovation that is implemented in Resident Evil 3 Nemesis is RNG, and there's a whole lot of it in this game. So, it is good to know beforehand what you're getting into to avoid confusion. First off, some items will randomly change or be in another area in every playthrough. Also, enemies will also be randomly generated in certain areas. For example, you can have an area that spawns either zombies or zombie dogs. Preferably, you'll want the regular zombies, but then again, you might get the dogs instead, which is a pain to deal with. Oh, but it doesn't stop there, as puzzles will also be randomly generated every playthrough, meaning you won't be able to memorize input patterns for every puzzle on your second and third playthrough. I really like this change. I welcome it, because this means that every playthrough will be slightly different and it is something new to learn as you try to master the game and achieve that glorious S rank. And I'm hoping we can see the RNG implementation come back in future Resident Evil titles, like Resident Evil 9 for example. Now we must talk about a certain someone, a big pain in the ass, you might say. His name is Nemesis. This is Resident Evil 3's stalker enemy. You will see him appear many times in your playthrough. You will often encounter him in tight hallways where you feel as though you can't escape. He essentially makes you feel powerless. And that's what I love about him. He is relentless in his pursuit and is incredibly difficult to put down without exploits. But if you do somehow manage to put him down, you will be rewarded with valuable items for your journey. If you're planning on fighting this guy every chance you get on your first playthrough, good luck. And make sure you take note of how to craft the different types of grenade rounds like I previously mentioned. Word of advice? Save some freeze rounds for this guy. Trust me, you'll thank me later. Nemesis will also appear as boss fights throughout the game. I thought they were pretty good considering how Resident Evil bosses were in the past, but there is one near the end that was a bit too janky for my taste. When it comes to enemies, Resident Evil 3 does try to spice things up a bit. Brainsuckers are introduced early on. They threw me off by how fast they were, and I found them particularly annoying in tight corridors. Funnily enough, if they grab you, it could lead you to get poisoned. So avoiding these disgusting creatures is always a #1 priority for me. There is also the addition of Hunter Gammas that you will encounter in the latest parts of the game. They don't add a whole lot to the enemy variety, but they do have an interesting design, and they have a particular kill animation that is very disturbing. If you know, you know. Familiar faces have evolved, as regular zombies are much more aggressive, and pose much more of a threat this time around. Sometimes, they'll go turbo. What that means is that they'll go in a crazed state, where they are much faster, leading you into getting bit since you weren't ready for that change in behavior. They also do a lot more damage than they did in Resident Evil 2, and they're overall just more vicious. Hunters also make a reappearance. They are a lot faster than they were in Resident Evil 1, and I never take a chance with them. Freeze grenades for you, my friend. In Resident Evil 3, you are thrown straight into the ruins of Raccoon City. This time, you are no longer trapped in a single location for the first half of the game. You are now instead roaming through a much more open-ended map that you will have to backtrack a couple times. Nowhere near the amount of backtracking as other games such as Code Veronica, but enough so that it still feels like you're playing a classic survival horror game. Your goal this time isn't to leave a location to hop on the next one, but is instead the city in its entirety. A motivator that is constantly reminded to you as you meet the members of Umbrella's private military, and depending on which tasks you decide to do first, you will trigger different cutscenes in different places. Speaking of cutscenes, I guess now is the time to talk about the small QTEs that you will encounter throughout the game. These QuickTime events serve as to grant the player a choice in key moments that will either reward the player or, well, do absolutely nothing for the player. Yeah. Now, it isn't a big deal if you take the less favorable route. It won't ever result as a death, but you could still miss out on valuable items if you do. Your goal in the city section is to acquire 3 different items to repair the train that will lead you into your escape. You'll look for a cable, an oil container, and a fuse, which is a whole lot more refreshing compared to just collecting medallions or chess pieces. Despite the city being in ruins, it still oozes with personality and it feels lived in, or at least feels like it used to. And as you attempt your escape, you'll encounter different environmental changes, like zombies bursting out of windows, and of course there will be many other encounters with the Nemesis as well. As you make your way around the city, you'll eventually reach the police station. Now this portion of the game is very short-lived and doesn't add a whole lot to the experience, but it still mixes things up quite a bit. Granted, you only get to explore a limited number of rooms of the RPD, but the surprise of Nemesis kept things fresh and exciting. I like how they pushed you through a false sense of security, as you thought you were safe from Nemi, and then boom, he bursts out the window, chasing you with a rocket launcher. It was very well done. Then, after you fail to escape Raccoon City, you will find yourself in the clock tower, which the remake of Resident Evil 3 unfortunately removed, despite it occupying 1/3 of the game. There isn't a whole lot of backtracking, nor is there a lot of combat in this section, but this area's aesthetic and puzzles were so strong that it made for a memorable experience. Then you get to play with Carlos in the hospital. It is pretty straightforward. It has nice combat, puzzles, and this section passes by fast. It's neat, I like it. Then you get to play as Jill once more and make your way inside the park. This one is one of my favorite parts of the game. Not only are puzzles strong here as well, but there is also a lot of intense combat that encourages careful planning, making you desperate for resources as you feel helpless in these tight corridors. And it all ends with a solid boss fight with a gigantic worm. In this fight, you can't just reposition and shoot at it. You must bait him first, or he'll take away a big chunk of your health. Also, he's extremely weak to acid rounds, so make sure you stock up on those. And the game finally wraps up in the factory. This is the most underwhelming part of the game. And again, that's nothing new for the series, as every final area has been the worst parts of every RE game. But the final battles with Nemesis were actually nice, except for his tentacles, which actually felt nearly impossible to dodge. Resident Evil 3 is a hard game. It is especially rough on your first playthrough as you're still mastering the new mechanics and adapting to the more aggressive enemies. But this isn't a game where you'll have to worry about ammo. I feel like it offers you more than enough ammunition to handle pretty much anything the game throws at you. I guess the ammunition problem comes from whether you have the more favorable resources to handle specific encounters. For example, like having the acid rounds in a warm fight like I previously mentioned. And I feel like most players will struggle in finding healing items more, as dealing with Nemi is extremely difficult if you don't know how to dodge his attacks. So, I guess what I'm trying to say is that the challenges in Resi 3 lean more so in its combat and puzzles rather than resource management. But I will admit that I was often struggling with the limited inventory space in the beginning. I hope you can tell by now, but I love Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. Long gone are the days of the disappointing remake, as I can now finally enjoy the original. Hell, I loved it so much that I worked my way up to the A rank, which is considered as an S rank in the American version. All in all, I thought Resident Evil 3 was amazing. It had incredible locations, strong puzzles, some really good boss fights, and had great gameplay innovations. It is everything and more of what I want in a Resident Evil game. I would honestly give this a 10 out of 10. With time, my opinion might change, but never to the point where I think this isn't incredible. But now I want to know what you guys think. Do you think Resident Evil 3 is one of the best of the trilogy? Or do you think it was lackluster to what came before? If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing, and I would really appreciate it. Also, make sure to turn on your notifications if you want to see more content like this. And now, with all that being said, see you guys later.